You also agree that the brave men and women working along the southern border and at our ports of entry, our Border Patrol and CBP officers, serve a critical role in interdicting drugs before they hit our streets?
Senator, as I say often, the way at DEA, we are the only single mission federal law enforcement agency committed to narcotics and to stopping the global supply chain. We play offense, and so we're tracking these cartels worldwide and across our
So is that a yes? We've got limited time.
DHS's responsibility is to maintain the southern border and the ports of entry. Our investigations do tell us that the vast majority of fentanyl is coming in the ports of entry, two particularly in California and two in Arizona.
So is that a yes, that you would agree that CBP officers, both on the southern border and the ports of entry, play a critical role in interdicting drugs?
Yes, Senator. I believe it's a DHS responsibility, and it's a critical one.
So if we decided to cut the number of Border Patrol agents dramatically, let's say in half, would you agree that would hurt our efforts to stop illegal drugs?
Senator, I would defer some of this to the Department of Homeland Security and Secretary Mayorkas.
You're not willing to answer that question?
But here's what I would say about this. We believe that DHS plays vital defense.
Okay, those are talking points. Would cutting the number of CBP agents in half hurt our ability to stop drugs? Yes or no?
Senator, I believe it would.
Okay. That's effectively what's happened under the Biden administration. Because right now today, more than half of the CBP agents are engaged in housekeeping and chauffeurs and babysitting of the 5.5 million illegal aliens who have crossed the border. They're not on the border. They're not at the ports of entry. They are instead processing the highest rate of illegal immigration in history. Now, Democrat members of Congress have the remarkable claim that the open borders under Joe Biden has no impact on the record fentanyl and drugs that are flooding across our borders. Between October 2021 and September 2022, one CBP source estimated there were 364,000 gotaways, people that ran away at the southern border. Another Border Patrol officials put the number of gotaways at 1.2 million. Gotaways can vary from terrorists on the terror watch list. In fiscal year 2022, 98 people on the terror watch list were encountered at the southern border that we know of. Or they can be drug dealers carrying drugs. Is that correct?
Senator, I'm going to defer questions on the border and the ports of entry to the Department of Homeland Security.
So the DEA has no view on whether drug dealers crossing the border carry drugs?
Senator, as I said, from our investigations, what we see is that the majority of fentanyl.
I didn't ask the majority. I said drug dealers and gotaways are carrying drugs, many of them.
Senator, what we see is mostly what we see is mostly tractor trailers and personal vehicles.
All right, so you're sticking to the talking points closely, and congratulations, it's the Democrat talking points, that the open borders don't matter, that 328,000 or 1.2 million gotaways don't matter. We had 100,000 people die last year of drug overdoses. My sister died of a drug overdose just over a decade ago. This is a crisis, but it is a man-made crisis. This administration made a conscious political decision to open the borders. And one of the results is they have turned Mexican drug cartels into multi-billionaires. In 2018, the amount of money cartels made from human trafficking, according to the New York Times, was $500 million. Now, just from human trafficking, the cartels are making $13 billion a year. Again, according to the New York Times, that's a 2,600% increase. Administrator Milgram, the single best thing that happened to Mexican drug cartels in history was Joe Biden becoming president, opening the border, and making tens of billions of dollars for these vicious criminals. In your judgment, is it a good thing that these cartels now have tens of billions of dollars from human trafficking and drug trafficking?
Senator Cruz, I really appreciate the opportunity to answer your question. And as I have said clearly and will continue to say, there are two cartels in Mexico, the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartel, that are responsible for the devastation that
the air mission system failed. About 15 hours later, after failing to reboot the system, the FAA ordered a full ground stop of the national airspace system for the first time since September 11th, 22 years ago. The ground stop was because America was under attack. But this time, this ground stop was the result of a federal agency's inability to modernize, despite Congress providing the required resources to do so. The Washington Post called the ground stop, quote, almost unprecedented, and said the FAA, quote, learned long ago their systems were dependent on rickety foundations, but didn't do enough to update technology. Despite a similar outage in 2008, the FAA still has not improved the system. A technology specialist involved in the 2008 outage blamed, quote, organizational inertia, something I've heard many times before when people describe problems at the FAA. The Wall Street Journal said, quote, given the importance of the FAA's mission, this kind of failure is hard to excuse. If glitches happen all the time, why doesn't the FAA have redundancy? Canada's NOTAM system, operated by a nonprofit, experienced apparently unrelated problems the same day as the United States, but planes there kept flying. The NOTAM breakdown last month was clearly a mistake. I fear it is emblematic of a culture afraid to innovate, stuck operating inefficiently, and illustrative of why President Biden needs to choose an administrator for the FAA with a proven ability to manage change within large organizations and with the requisite aviation and safety experience. The current nominee that is pending lacks that aviation experience. The FAA's safety mission, Mr. Nolan, as you know well, is too important to take for granted. There's a front page story in the Wall Street Journal today on the FAA's inability to modernize NOTAM. In that story, an FAA spokesperson claims that prioritizing NOTAM upgrades wouldn't guarantee funding from Congress. That's simply not true. Congress has fully funded NOTAM modernization for more than 10 years. Every year since 2013, Congress has given as much or more than the amount requested by the executive agency for 10 years now. And yet, full modernization is still several years away. After investing millions of dollars, I'm wondering why this bureaucracy is taking so long to do its job. And is the system worth modernizing at this point? Because the status quo simply isn't acceptable. There must be accountability when an agency is not using taxpayer funds efficiently, and that, of course, starts with an accountable leader. Now in his third year as Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Buttigieg has failed to deliver any meaningful reform at the FAA. Although NOTAM modernization started a decade ago, this administration seems focused on semantics. Whether it's replacing the term mother with birthing person, or creating a new checkbox on passports for people who claim to be neither a man nor woman, this administration's desire to signal its virtue seems to know no limits. It's even infected the FAA. Instead of it focusing on safety, the FAA and DOT were working hard to change NOTAM's name from Notice to Airmen to Notice to Air Missions. I would suggest instead the focus should have been on making sure the damn thing worked. Shockingly, renaming NOTAM didn't prevent an outage. Way back in 1994, Al Gore proposed to reform the FAA into a self-funding, more efficient organization. Today, the flying public is stuck with a self-regulating and flailing agency stuck in the 20th century. It is my hope that we can use this hearing and the 2023 FAA reauthorization bill to explore meaningful reforms to the FAA and its air traffic organization. And let me say finally, in recent weeks, we've seen several very concerning near misses that were almost mass. Was sexually assaulted by a senior as part of a campus custom known as Senior Salute, a game where upperclassmen competed to have sex with younger students. In 2015, the culprit was acquitted of felony rape, but found guilty of misdemeanor sexual assault and endangering the welfare of a child. You have repeatedly said you were just an advocate. You were just representing the school, where the school was St. Paul's, one of the most prestigious boarding schools in America. And yet, in your representation of St. Paul's, it was St. Paul's that was the victim. You portrayed the school that a sitting U.S. Senator, indeed a member of this committee, attended. Former Secretary of State John Kerry attended. Former FBI Director Robert Mueller attended. A member of the Kennedy family and 3 Vanderbilts have attended. And in your view, that school was the victim, not the 15-year-old girl who was sexually assaulted. Your response to Senator Hawley was, I was just representing my clients. Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Delaney, you represented your clients very poorly. Because as a lawyer, if your client is a school and they've decided their strategy is to out the girl that was sexually assaulted while in their care and custody, that school is doing a crappy job, and the lawyer who goes in and says, sir, yes, sir, happy to do it, is doing a lousy job representing his client. Now, just a moment ago, you answered questions from Senator Cornyn. I actually wrote down a couple of things. Earlier in the day, you acknowledged very kindly that the Prout family, I'm quoting you, the Prout family had a strong interest in anonymity. And then just a moment ago, you answered Senator Cornyn, I wrote it down again, the school did not file a motion to remove anonymity. Mr. Delaney, that testimony is false. I want to read from the motion you filed that is right here. This is on page 2. The school recognizes that J.D. has an interest in protecting her anonymity. Now, notice you told this committee the Prout family had a strong interest. Oddly enough, the word strong was not in your pleading. You graciously conceded they have an interest. Okay? However, in balancing that interest against the prejudice to the school and the public interest in disclosure, the following common sense measures should be taken to mitigate the prejudice to the school, the victim, elite private boarding school. The school shall be entitled to identify plaintiffs and J.D. during discovery. Plaintiffs and J.D. should not be allowed to proceed under pseudonyms at the trial of the matter. You asked the court, strip her anonymity. And you just told Senator Cornyn, I didn't ask the court to strip her anonymity. Why did you give a false answer to Senator Cornyn?
Senator Cruz, thank you for the question. I did not in any way intend to provide any misleading answers. The section of the brief that you're referencing involves the use of a pseudonym at trial as opposed to at pretrial phases of the case. And I'm not aware of...
And so your view is it's common sense, that's the word you used, that a teenager, the victim of sexual assault, should be stripped of a pseudonym. That's just a common sense step.
No, I'm saying that First Circuit precedent treats the use of fictitious names before a jury at a trial quite differently than it does at pretrial phases.
So Mr. and Mrs. Prout are here today. Thank you for coming. You and your daughter have been victimized now 3 times. First, on that horrific night. Secondly, when Mr. Delaney, representing the school, went into court and tried to strip your daughter's anonymity, tried to out her against her wishes. And third, when the Biden administration chose to reward him by nominating him to the Court of Appeals. I would encourage everyone to read the letter that Chessie Prout has filed. And Mr. Delaney, there is a reason why virtually every Democrat has skipped this hearing. They're embarrassed about this nomination. I want to read one paragraph from this letter and ask you a final question. From Chessie Prout. If Michael Delaney is confirmed, if an attorney who has brazenly intimidated a minor victim of sexual assault is given the distinct privilege to serve as a judge for the United States Court of Appeals, you are telling victims and survivors that you not only approve of victim intimidation tactics, you reward their enactors with one of the highest legal appointments in the state of Massachusetts, She goes on to say she made this point to the Biden Justice Department. Mr. Delaney, if this committee votes to confirm you, what message does that tell every other victim